Bonjour, good morning. My name is Hervé. What is your name?
My name is Tone Running and Hervé Adman. We are going to moderate the session with Stephen Frears and Dominic Treadwell-Collins. Isn't that correct? Yes. And we are happy to see you here this morning. If you have any questions and so on, please wave when we will try to cluster the questions together during this conversation. And yes, because this is also your session. So you need to take responsibility to get out of it what you want. Yes.
Yeah.
So, welcome. We are very happy to see you here. And we thought you might start with how this series came upon. I mean, what started? There was a book. I mean, of course, you both, perhaps you didn't experience the event itself, the time when you were not born then.
I didn't know. I didn't know the story. You did, Stephen.
Yeah.
Yes, but you should talk. You should answer this.
So I'd left the BBC and started at Blueprint Pictures, who are a film company, and they'd made 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, and The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, and they wanted to get into television, and I got there, and there was this book on the table the first day I arrived, and they said it's about Jeremy Thorpe, and I said, I don't have a clue who Jeremy Thorpe is. I've never heard this story before. I read the book, and John Preston's book is very jaunty and fun, and he tells the story very well and sets a tone that I think Stephen's carried through. And they said it was my job to put it together. So I approached Russell T. Davies, who I knew already, and said, look, Russell, here's this amazing book. Do you want to adapt it? He said, no, I'm too busy, go away. I said, well, let me just send you the book and let it just sit there on your desk when you're writing. And then he called me 2 days later and said, you fucker. He just said, you fucker, I have to do this. Meanwhile, Stephen sat at a dinner next to a lady called Andrea Wong, who worked for Sony, who own a bit of Blueprint. And she started talking to you, didn't she, Stephen?
Yes, she started describing how she owned all these companies. She owned you, and she owned Andy Harris, who makes The Crown. She was clearly extremely powerful.
And then she mentioned the story to Stephen, and you said that you knew the story, obviously.
If you are as old as I am, you know the story. Thank you very much. You know the story. I said, oh, that sounds very good. I'd love a go at that.
And then, so we had Stephen kind of waiting. Stephen said, let me see the script. So Russell as a writer, he delivers a script that's ready. You know, some writers deliver a script that you go, okay, this is a nice starting point. We're going to have 6 months of notes. Russell delivers a script and you go, okay, we could film it today. So we got the script to Stephen, and I've got the email. You emailed me and said, I have 2 notes. This is fantastic. Or 3 notes. Was it 2 or 3 notes? Not many notes.
And that was it. That was it. I mean,
That was it.
Why should there have been more?
I don't know. Tell me. I don't know.
It was a very, very good. I mean, the truth is, the story was wonderful, the book was wonderful, and Russell is a very, very, very good writer. There isn't really a lot more to say.
But what about the book? Because it's facts here, and it's also partly fiction. I mean, what has been going...
No, it's not fiction at all. The book has no fiction in it.
No fiction, because I think in the series, I mean, there are fiction in the private rooms and so on.
There are bits that are made up, yeah, but it's not. It's all based on what happened. I mean, we may have got it wrong, but we've tried to get it right.
But what I think you and Russell have done is looked at, it's bits like the conversations between Marion, the wife, and Jeremy, those kind of private moments. And it's the personal stuff that you and Russell have played around with. And in the end, it's a love story at the end. In the end, by the end of episode 3, there's a heart to it all, and you realise these two men loved each other in their very strange, messed up way, I think.
I mean, I'd done it all before. I'd done all this before. I mean, the Queen is the same. You know, that's what happened. There are bits in the Queen that are invented. I have no idea if the Queen ever saw a stack. You know, they're just somehow part of the story. And I'd made a film about Blair becoming leader of the Labour Party. So it wasn't new territory.
Je suis désolé, je vais avant before 11 past 10. My English is not as good as it should be, so I'm going to ask a few questions in French. À chaque fois, vous avez une diversité étonnante.
You have amazing diversity in all of the films that you've made, and every time you're talking about a different story and you create a different world with sounds and images. What's the first thing that you do as a film director, or what's your instant reflex when you've got some raw material in your hands, when you've got the screenplay which is ready to film? What's the first thing you think about as a director?
The first thing I did on this film was to hire Hugh. Once you had Hugh, you laid the whole film out, really. You hire a light comedian who can do jokes, who is a great, I knew was a great actor. Once you have him, everything is sort of, is really stretches ahead of you. And then you slowly start to understand what the film is about. You know, this film covers quite large parts of Britain, and we had to work out how to deal with that. Goes to America, which of course they had no money to do, so it's very practical.
Et est-ce que vous commencez rapidement à penser à
Did you
la façon dont vous allez réaliser,
immediately start to imagine how you were going to choose your shots, your lighting? Do you think about that instantly, or do you just hand that over to your team? You always work with the same people. You've got people who work with you who know your taste, who know what you want. So what's your process?
I don't think I have a process. I don't do any of it. I don't visualize things. I don't have visions or anything that people talk about.
You don't have visions?
No.
Yeah, good for you.
No, I slept last night very, very well. I didn't have a dream. I mean, when I came yesterday, I looked at the palace and thought, oh, we could have done liaison here. So I'm 30 years out of date. I think it's probably more to do with literature than anything. You try to understand what it is you're being asked to film. Now I know what French chateaux are like. I'm a master of them. When I came here to make liaison, I knew absolutely nothing and had to have it all explained to me. So in a way, you start a sort of course of trying to understand what the film is about. But I knew this film was comic because I'd lived through it, and when the case was in the courts, you know, schoolboys used to make jokes about it. It was so ridiculous. Oh, you haven't got to episode 3 yet. Sorry, I didn't mean to spoil anything. I knew immediately what the tone was, and I could see that Russell had written that.
Yes, but vous parliez de la tonalité du.
You're talking about the tone of the story.
Very funny one. Je vais prendre l'exemple de la première.
Let's take the example of the very first scene in the series.
Vous avez vu,
We saw it last night. We're in, there's Hugh Grant having dinner with his best friend, and I think that must have been the 4th cut of the first episode. There's a close-up of the meat dish, the raw meat dish, the tartare. Was that in the screenplay, for example? Because that really does give the whole tone. Was that the same for you? Perhaps I'm being too intellectual in my approach. I am French, after all.
Est-ce que ça, non, mais sérieusement, est-ce que
but in all seriousness, is that part of setting the scene?
Do you know Michel Simon, the critic?
Yeah.
He made a documentary about Billy Wilder, and at the end he asked Billy Wilder a question, and Billy Wilder says, "It's very, very kind of you, but I think you're mistaking me for a serious person."
Je savais que vous alliez me répondre ça, mais ça fait plaisir d'entendre quand même.
I think
the tartare was, I think that's what, I don't know if that's what they ate. That was in the script, the steak tartare.
It was that they were eating steak tartare, but the detail wasn't
And
there.
actually the cameraman said, "I'm going to do a shot of the steak tartare." I said, "Do what you like."
For me, it says it's going to be a raw story.
Then there was a long discussion about whether his fork should go in the egg or not. I didn't think the film depended on that shot.
No, I didn't say that, but...
What I did like in that
It was
scene...
just an example, please.
No, I know you're looking for things that don't exist. You assume I have some sort of brain that works. You think I'm an auteur. It's all the fault of the French. It really is. There is a line that Hugh says, which I must have remembered from my childhood. He says to the man he's having dinner with, Bessel, he said, "I didn't know you were musical." And calling people musical was a euphemism when I was a child. "Oh, I see, you're gay." And this line made me laugh so much that at that point I agreed to, this was about page 3, I decided to make the film. If a writer can write with that degree of wit and subtlety, fine by me.
I think if you look at the script for episode 1, for example, compared to the final episode, you'll see everything that Stephen does. He does this all the time. He's added Russell's script is incredible, but you're getting in a car and you're driving along very quickly without pause for thought. And what Stephen does, even though he pretends he doesn't, is he'll look at it and he'll ground it and add a breath and a life and a humanity. And I think that's the thing, that Russell's writing is so wonderful, and he kept going, "This is a romp." And what Stephen does is he grounds it and adds a humanity to it. It's those moments of Jeremy Thorpe putting his hat on and looking at himself in the mirror before he faces the journalists. It's those moments of humanity. Stephen's made it a very, very human story as well. And I think if it hadn't been Stephen directing, it would have been fantastic because it's Russell. But I think what Stephen's added is a universality and a humanity. And there's the fun, but it also will hit you in the stomach and make you remember that these are real people and that this story actually happened. Because as funny and ridiculous as it is, and it is ridiculous that these things actually happened, there are real people involved. They're real people, and there were big repercussions because of it. These people's children are still alive. These people's children are still trying to defend their parents and their parents' awful actions. So Stephen's always going to be glib about it, but he's very clever.
Yeah.
It's a very asymmetric power relationship between the two, between Jeremy Thorpe and Norman in the very beginning. And I think it's so easy to make comic out of Jeremy Thorpe because he's a very powerful person. But how was that with Norman?
This is hopeless. How was what with Norman?
Was it more difficult to make comic scenes with Norman because he was had a totally different status than...
Well, they're comic, but they're also full of pathos. Isn't he taking pills the whole time? And
yeah.
No, he hasn't got anywhere to live. Seems quite serious. The truth is, now I think about it, now I'm sitting here in France thinking about it, I spent a lot of my life watching the films of Renoir. Everything we did is in the films of Renoir.
Yeah. But were there things that did you have ideas of things to do that you didn't do? Were there things taken out of the script, or was it there all the time?
No, there are other bits of the story that I would like to have done. There's a whole financial thing which got left out because there wasn't time to do it.
And I think we could have expanded it, and we could have made 6 episodes. And lots of people have gone, why didn't you do 6 episodes? And I think what we were very clear about from the beginning was keeping it tight, keeping it to 3 episodes. At the moment, there's a real want from broadcasters and from the finance people to make as many episodes of television as possible. And what we were very firm from the beginning is to make 3 fantastic story-crammed episodes. So often nowadays, you watch a show and you go, oh, episode 3, get through episode 3 because episode 4 is good. That happens all the time. And I think we were very conscious of that. And Russell and Stephen were very conscious of this, to keep it tight and packed with story. And that's what I think people have found quite refreshing about it at the moment, because we're not going after the money, we're going after the best story.
Et donc, on parlait du rythme, et donc je vous posais une
You're talking
question
about
sur la
rhythm. I've got a question for you about how things worked on set. Did you keep your eye on the monitor all the time? I think you like to turn your back to the monitor and simply listen to your actors. Does that help you to find the pace for a scene?
Well, at any point you should say to the actors, do it faster. That's just always good, because otherwise it just takes forever. I don't know, it seemed to be done, it seemed to be at a certain pace. Russell, I remember, was very pleased because we were doing it so fast, and he believes in all of that. I feel useless here.
But the actors...
You're not, tell me.
With Stephen, I'll speak for him. With the actors, every actor there loved working with Stephen, and Stephen's very direct with the actors about what you want. And there was one actor you didn't like. There was one actor who's no longer in it. That you said, you on set, Stephen sat in the monitor, the actor, it was a little part, and you suddenly went, no, he's wrong.
Well, it's not that he couldn't do it. You just think, oh, he shouldn't have been cast. He didn't know how to do what was required at the right level of subtlety. English actors are very, very good. The truth is they can do all this stuff all day. They can play class and sex and jokes. They can do all that standing on their heads.
But what about the casting process? Can you tell us a little bit more how you're doing this?
Well, actually, it was even worse than that, because I was opening a film at the time, Victorian Abdul. So I had to go to America or around the world or whatever to open this film. So I actually wasn't there.
And then there is a casting person doing the casting?
Well, I've worked with them for... Is this all right? I've worked with them for 30 years, so they know, and they're very, very clever. And the idea that they could do it without me was such a relief. And I wasn't there for preparing the film. They just eventually took me around and said, we're doing that here. Oh, all right, well.
But do you have an audition process with types like no?
No.
You just decide that...
No, most actors who come in to see you, they're trained and they're very skillful, and also the casting director. I remember when John Cusack came to see me for The Grifters, for Les Anarchers, and the casting director, who also cast Woody Allen's film, so he's the best casting director in the world, said, oh, the person you want is the one coming in now. So I was told that he was a very good actor. Being a good actor is easy. It's having the right human qualities that really matters.
And can you tell us a bit more about the preparation before you start shooting?
Well, I can, because I wasn't there. I can't because I wasn't there.
But you came directly on set? You didn't rehearse or prepare with the actors at all?
I don't remember rehearsing. I didn't know Ben's work. Ben, who is the most famous young actor in England, I didn't know a great deal about him, I'm ashamed to say. But I went to see a play that he was in, playing the lead, and he was he was absolutely right for the part. He was rather stiff and formal, and that was the character he was playing. And I remember thinking, my God, there are 3 days between finishing his play and starting with us. I better do something strong. So I invited him to lunch with Norman Scott. So Norman Scott came up to London, which I think he hadn't been to for a long. He hadn't been to London for a long time. So I took them out to lunch, and Norman started to talk, and Ben's eyes came out on stalks. He was so astonished by the stories that Norman was telling. I said, I have nothing else to say. That's who you're playing.
And the two of them, Norman and Ben, sat together and just nattered away, and you could see Ben was listening to the cadences in his voice and watching his little mannerisms. And there's little moments with Ben Whishal's performance where he does little looks or little shimmy of the shoulder and the little thing with the hands, and it's there. And that was after an hour's lunch with Norman. And what's been interesting with the story is we've all had Norman on the phone all the way through, a bit like we've been Peter Bessel with Norman on the phone asking for things all the way through. And he's an amazing man. He's an amazing man. But he and Ben have formed some kind of strange bond, which is quite nice. You know, that Ben, you know, Ben's got very over-involved in Norman's story, as have we all.
Tell them about the jungle.
Can't talk about the jungle.
Why not?
Yeah, please.
Oh, no. Norman said to us the other day that he'd been asked to go on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which we said, don't, Norman, don't go. I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Because I think what this story's done for Norman is for years, this man has been shouting at the world, listen to what happened to me, and everyone's ignored him. And this film, this television series, has finally let people hear about Norman's side of the story. And it's only a television show. It's a television show. But ultimately, we changed the world a bit. A bit of justice has been done because Norman's story has been heard. And finally, people are going, oh gosh, Norman, we understand what you've been through. And I think when you watch all 3 episodes, you realize everyone ignored him. And finally, people are listening to Norman Scott and believing him. And he's, how old is he now? 76, Stephen?
No, he's in his 80s.
Yeah. And he's lived this life with this show, this story overshadowing him. And finally, he's been able to get a bit of catharsis, and he's been able to shake that off a bit. And then they reopened the case. Before the last episode, the case was reopened. And you go, actually, okay, this is television changing the world a bit.
Yeah. How many days of shooting? Just wonder.
10 weeks. 10 weeks. Which seemed about right.
Yeah.
And it was cross-bordered, or it was par décor, je veux dire, c'était cross-bordé.
Was there cross-boarding? Did you do it in chronological episode, chronological order?
What is cross-boarding?
I
3 episodes at once.
Yeah, I mean, if you are on a set and if there is a scene on the episode 6 or 3 on that set, you shoot that scene. The same day you're shooting the scene of episode 1.
Well, I'm sure there was a certain amount of that. Eventually it came down to I would just sit there and they would bring scenes in front of me. And I thought this film has been very, very well scheduled.
Ah, okay.
But it wasn't, the scenes weren't difficult. It was, I mean, no one believes me, but it was actually extremely easy.
And Hugh had done a lot of research as well. Hugh had watched anything that Jeremy Thorpe had appeared in, Hugh had watched. He learnt to play the violin.
Yeah,
I saw yesterday. That's him playing, and Patricia Hodge, who plays his mother.
You mean he learned for that?
For this.
For this?
He had I think it was 10 weeks rehearsal, I think, for that. He sat, we found him, he said, I want to play the violin. So we went, okay.
Oh, it's a lot of work.
We'll get you a violinist, teach you that. So he had lessons. But apparently on About a Boy, he had guitar lessons, didn't he? For some...
and on Florence, he had to dance. And he made a tremendous fuss about it, and then was brilliant. So I was very, very unsympathetic. And
he was worried at the beginning that he said when we took him for lunch, you said he didn't want to do an imitation. And Stephen said, oh no, Helen Mirren in The Queen, she embodies the Queen. She doesn't impersonate the Queen. It's an embodiment of the Queen. And that's what Hugh latched onto, that it's not him being an impersonation of Jeremy Thorpe. He kind of lived him. And I think for now, because of the film, I think for a lot of people, Hugh Grant is now Jeremy Thorpe.
He's the true Jeremy Thorpe.
Yeah.
Par exemple, ce qu'il fait avec la langue tout le temps on the lips, you know, he has created that.
It's something to do with his mouth. I couldn't tell you exactly what, and I could see he's doing something with his mouth, and it's very, very clever.
Yeah,
he doesn't tell me what he was doing.
Yeah. And the first one who does that on the screen is not Jeremy Thorpe, is Norman Scott, right? I've seen that yesterday. Le premier à faire ça sur l'écran.
The first one to do that with running their lips along their mouth, it was Norman Scott who did that first of all.
J'imagine des choses, faut pas
Or
faire
am I
attention
just
des fois.
imagining things? I'm perhaps getting ahead of myself again.
You know more than I know.
Yeah. So,
So,
énormément travaillé, donc
you
ça,
worked
ce genre d'idée, il
a
le
lot,
trouve,
and this kind of idea. Did Hugh come with these kind of ideas
il le
also?
fait, et voilà.
I don't remember conversations about them.
Okay.
When Hugh signed up, he said, there's a condition that Daniel Phillips does the hair and makeup, who'd done Florence Foster Jenkins for you, hadn't he? And Hugh said it's very much, if I can feel comfortable about the appearance, then everything else will fit into place. The brown contact lenses, the haircut.
Non, mais par exemple, le costume qui est trop grand pour lui, c'est quelque chose qui est. C'est une
And
erreur,
the
c'est quoi?
suit, which was too
Du coup,
big for him,
c'est-
was that
c'est
a
pas-
mistake
c'est pas
or was
fait,
that
mais
a
ce costume
choice
qui est
on
trois
purpose?
tailles
It
au-dessus,
seems it's 3 sizes too big for
c'est
him.
décidé à quel moment,
When
c'est
did you
dans-
decide to
dans
put him in that
une
big
construction commune du
suit?
personnage, ou c'est lui qui vient avec
Did
l'idée?
Hugh decide on that, or?
I work with these very, very clever people. They are just as clever as I am, and they can see things for themselves. They sort all that out.
Okay.
I can see you want me to be somebody I'm not.
No.
I'm very, very interested in your questions. Your questions bear no resemblance to what the experience that I had. But your questions suggest that you wanted somebody more artistic,
No.
more auteur-like.
Just trying to understand how that beautiful thing has been done.
I mean, in the end, you look at the film and think, oh, this is fine. You know, I'm really pleased. So I don't feel that I failed any tests, but I didn't do the things you expected me to do.
Okay.
But do you have the same crew, more or less?
I brought my cameraman. I brought the cameraman I've done the last few films with. I'm about to work with a new cameraman, so I'm a nervous wreck.
But can you say something about the difference between how you are working today and how you were working when you started, when you were a fresh director?
Well, it is very, very different because I've been doing it for 50 years, so I suppose I've acquired a certain confidence, and I know the mistakes you make. I mean, I've made many films that haven't succeeded, so you learn about that. But when things are working, but you also learn how all these people on the set are very, very talented, and that there's absolutely no need to. I mean, I can see if you're Stanley Kubrick, you do everything yourself because that's what he wanted to do. But I don't want to do everything myself. I get great pleasure from the work other people do, particularly if I'm asleep. So really, you're there just to sort of provide a space for other people to be creative. And of course you're watching what they're doing. And if you don't like something, you say it. But they're very, very talented. Designers, costume designers, cameramen, operators. They're brilliant people.
So it's more
You
a
don't
question.
believe a word I'm saying, do you? Nobody ever believes a word.
I do, because I think, what is happening when you get more experienced, you set people free, you give them more space, you start up as a control freak, and thanks God you control less the older you get.
But we had the team who were either so fiercely loyal to Stephen and knew what Stephen wanted, or we had new people who were the costume designer and the set designer. They hadn't worked with you before. They'd worked together before, And we knew that they were great, and they came in, they met Stephen. Stephen went, yep, great. They got on with it. They were so excited and in awe of working with Stephen, who didn't care at all. That was quite nice, to work with someone new with that, wasn't it?
Well, I would give a lot of the credit to the designer who just said, well, if you do this and this. Designers have always played a big part in my life. I remember the designer on Liaison Dangereuse. He won an Oscar, he had no money. And they would take me around the chateau around Paris. I didn't understand a thing. And then one night he came and explained the whole film to me. And he said, look, this is the most powerful person in the film. We'll give them this chateau. I'll build you a corridor where Valmont can walk past this room to get to that room. And he just laid the whole film out for me. It was absolutely wonderful lesson. So designers are priceless people. And it's not just to do with aesthetics. It's the whole dramatic structure of it. The whole shape of it is coming from the design, I think.
But then you get producer-wise, my producer hat on, that you go, okay, amazing. I've got Stephen Frears, and Stephen comes with his DOP, and Stephen's DOP comes with his crew. And then because his crew are on a certain wage, everyone else has to be on parity. So what we found, and this is the thing that is happening a lot at the moment, is with television and film coming together, which is so exciting to get Stephen Frears doing television and Hugh Grant. You've got so much money being spent on the top end on all the crew, and then you're going, okay, locations, and we had an expensive crew, we had an expensive cast, we had an expensive writer, expensive director. You suddenly look at the money and go, we haven't got enough money to make the bloody thing. And that was what was hard, is that actually as television and film are merging, how much money is left to actually make the television show? And that was interesting for us, because we made this for the BBC, but we couldn't have made it just with the BBC, so we had to go and find a co-production partner. So we were out to lots of different people, and in the end, Amazon gave the most money and were the most cuddly. So that's the thing that's very interesting going on with television at the moment, is it's very hard to make something for one broadcaster, especially a terrestrial network at the moment. And that's what's the battle. And that's the sad thing, is you take something to the BBC and they go, okay, and so who's your co-production partner on this? So if you want something that feels and looks so expensive, it's very hard at the moment to get the money.
So is it 50-50, Amazon, BBC? Yeah. And do Amazon interfere in the content?
They left us alone. Their one note was, make sure that this story is accessible to an American audience. Make sure an American audience can understand what's going on. That was their only note. They left us alone. We told them who we were casting. I mean, we had Ben Whishaw, Hugh Grant, Alex Jennings, and Patricia Hodge in place very early on. We sent them the scripts, and because it was Stephen, they all agreed they wanted to do it straight early on. So they kind of left us alone, which was nice.
But what about the BBC?
Yeah, the BBC didn't leave us alone so much. But I'd worked for them before, and so we had an amazing commissioner, Lucy Richer, there, who I'd worked with a lot. So she and I had a shorthand. And we fought them. The BBC are very scared as a company, especially at the moment, and they've always been scared. But they can be quite lily-livered. They can be quite scared they're scared of complaints. And with this show, I think everyone went, oh gosh, everyone's going to complain. And everyone looked at the Vaseline scene a lot.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of people looked at the Vaseline scene. And they said, ooh, should we take the sex out? And we fought them a lot. There was a lot of fighting in the BBC going, come on, keep the edges on this. Which they left us alone, I think, as well. Because it was Stephen and Russell, they said, do what you want to do, which was good. But it was a fight. You always fight. I like fighting the BBC. It's fun. It's like fighting with your auntie. You can win in the end.
But were there complaints?
There have been. the usual, though. It's with the BBC, because they have a duty log that comes in every day. It's why do I have to watch two men kissing on my television? I threw out my dinner. It's that, and then you go, okay, let's give you more men kissing, and fuck you. Yeah. There's that element. The BBC are they get very scared about these things, and you have to tell them to come on. Because when you were doing Play for Today, Stephen, the BBC was the controversial channel, wasn't it?
Well, we were the controversial part of the BBC. It did seem to me a badge of honour that there had to be complaints, yes.
Yeah.
There was a wonderful thing. The man who keeps badgers in his house and whose brother has killed himself because he is gay, his son complained. I said, why, what's he complaining about? The actor was brilliant playing his father. He said, no, he's fiercely anti-homosexual. So he was complaining because his father actually introduced homosexual law reform into England. So it was on a huge scale, but what act of rebellion that was, I had no idea.
Are there any questions? Liselott.
Do I need a mic?
Yeah. A mic is coming, I believe so. Yeah.
I was thinking about when you make fiction about somebody who's actually not alive, but his family is alive. And you have talked about how you co-work with Norman and some others, but Jeremy Thorpe's family, did you have deep discussions with them, and how were they prepared to see this come back alive again and in a fictional form?
We met Norman, we met Dinah Stainton, the secretary who's in the first episode. She's still alive. She lives in Turkey at the moment. We met her. And everyone else, we met their families, and we talked to them about their parents and what we were doing. But we then stood back from them and went, okay, we've got every single bit of information we need from you, and we've done our duty of care to talk to you about your father, your mother, your story. So we were very, very careful not to say anything that wasn't in the public domain.
Okay, and to Stephen, because you have done this, as you said before many times, that you have taken well-known persons and then fictionalized them. I'm a little bit afraid to ask you anything, because I know I will ask you something you don't want to answer. But can you say something about, when the real person is there, or his near relatives are there, and you, as the filmmaker, is there a process in your head, like ethical thing going to and fro, what to do, what not to do?
When I made The Queen, I rang her up and said, why don't you come round and have a drink?
That's it.
Jeremy's son, he just says, well, I don't believe a word of it. I mean, I can see it is very difficult if your father is turned into this sort of national joke and accused of arranging a murder. I mean, I wouldn't want to be him. I can see how difficult it is. So in a sense, it's a lost cause. You can't say, well, I'll make a sympathetic portrait of you, or I'll make a film in which your father didn't do it, because he did do it. So it's a sort of lost cause. It's sort of hopeless.
But also, I hope that instead of Jeremy Thorpe being the punchline of a joke, I think by episode 3, you kind of love Jeremy as well. I think that's the thing. You dig into both of these men, and you're with Jeremy in his story as well. I think what you've done is humanized him more and stopped him being a silly joke and a punchline.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was just curious about
during
the process.
No, you trust yourself. I mean, Blair was tricky because by the time we made the first Blair film, I think the Iraq War had happened. Or no, maybe not. I can't quite remember. No. Of course, we made it in this century, and the war was also in this century. Anyway, it was more complicated with Blair, but you couldn't say in the middle of making a film about Blair, why don't we invade Iraq? I mean, there's a sort of limit. So you actually tend to behave excessively generous to the characters you're filming. The Queen, the Queen has had one bad week in her life, and we chose to make a film about that. Well, I can see that's sort of quite unkind, but it's also the only time when it's the only time when she's been interesting, because people's flaws are more interesting than their, etc., etc. Though the makers of The Crown wouldn't agree with me. The wealthy makers of The Crown. I don't know. I guess I trust myself.
Okay, thank you.
And the Queen always reminded us all of our mothers, so.
There is also the personal angle, I see. The personal angle, if the Queen reminds you of your mother, what would be in this series that reminds you of your the character of Jeremy Thorpe? What do you really like about him?
Well, it was nothing in that sense, except that was what the world was like. And indeed, if you look at Boris Johnson, the world hasn't changed. You know, the last government was full of old Etonians who behaved badly. And the person who hated the old Etonians most was Theresa May. But it was exactly the same people out of Eton behaving appallingly. Very, very little has changed. The ancien regime still lives. I'd happily shoot them all, chop their heads off.
Est-ce qu'il y a une autre question? Is there any question?
Yeah, the question is Stephen Frears. You said earlier, we know that you've made many, many films. Some of them were big successes, some less. Is still the success for you a complete mystery, or you knew that that film would work and that you were not sure, or it remains a complete mystery? The success, I mean, in a film.
The success of this film and these films, this, what do I call it, this program?
Drama.
This drama, it has been quite phenomenal on a scale that I've never come across before. The truth is, you know when you've done something good, that's easy. You know, but the idea that it's going to be successful is more mysterious. I remember with The Laundrette thinking the same thing. I can see this as a good film, you know, jolly good. But the idea that it's going to reach audiences and that people around the world are going to see it, it's inconceivable. So that's always a surprise and a disappointment as well. I've had a life of suffering.
Thank you.
But with the English Candle, did it create a lot of debate in the press, and did it have any consequences?
It got quite phenomenal attention. I mean, because people thought it was jolly good, but also because the memory of Thorpe is very, very, to people of my generation, it's very, very vivid, and it's part of your life. So a lot was written about Thorpe. Then they started discovering that they haven't seen episode 2. I can't speak. They started discovering that certain people were still alive, and that led to further speculation. It just went on and on.
And then they reopened the case just before we showed episode 3 because the papers found that the gunman who's hired, they had a big headline that he was still alive. We all sat there and went, we know he's alive. You can find him on Google, the gunman, quite easily. So what was lovely is suddenly it became this big national talking point, the show, and then it was suddenly Norman's getting his justice. And so what's been amazing is to be part of a big national talking point, wouldn't you say?
That's how the BBC described it. You've become part of the national conversation. Doesn't happen very often.
No.
And it happens it happened to me. When we made the first film about Blair, no one had ever made a film about a Prime Minister who was in office. Blair was Prime Minister when we made it. Well, obviously that's sort of scandalous and shocking and all of that, and the Queen was still Queen. And that always gets people quite excited. And indeed, now I think about it, the reason John Preston wrote the book was because Thorpe died. Thorpe had a terrible, terrible last 30 years of his life. He had Parkinson's, and the footage of him towards the end of his life is just unwatchable. It's so upsetting. But then he died. Then his wife died, his second wife died, and then he died 6 months later. And that was when books were suddenly published about him. So, you know, the writers had done the decent thing. Well, one was a biography that was authorized by Thorpe. Thorpe said, okay, I'll help you with this book, but you don't publish it until I'm dead. And John Preston wrote his book when Thorpe was dead. So people had already behaved with decency and respect.
After all the film you've done, is there one film you really would like to do and you have not done yet? About a character?
No.
Not like your dream movie you've not done yet about a character or someone?
I never wanted to make a film about Jeremy Thorpe or the Queen. No, I don't think like that. You'll be thinking I have visions like he does.
Because we're French, you know. We're
Absolutely.
trying to be intellectual. We're not. We're just.
You
we're
cannot
just
believe
trying.
how pragmatic I am. I am so pragmatic that I don't believe in Brexit.
Well done.
Ouais. On réfléchit trop, tu sais, Jean-Marc, je crois que Is there any question? Another one?
Yeah.
Please?
But can't you in the meanwhile talk a bit more about your working relationship and how it started, and how was it for you, Dominic, to come in and work with such an experienced director?
I was terrified of him, and also, as you can see, he's not that talkative. But it was quite, for you, Stephen, it's always about the script, and for you, it's about the story and the script, from my experience. And I'm trying to get Stephen to work with me on something else, and he won't engage until he's read the script. It's all about the script for you, isn't it? Yeah.
So I can only... People send me scripts, and you just say, oh, I like that, yes, let's do that, or let's not do that, or whatever. It's entirely to do with the writing.
La surprise est très importante, de lire quelque chose et vous aimez être surpris.
Yes, very, very much so. Very, very, very much so.
And you stay close to that first emotion to make the film.
Well, not deliberately, but you just think, oh, this is good fun. Oh, this is great. No, I'd like to do this. I remember when they sent me the script of The Liaison, you just thought, this is absolutely fantastic. Fantastic. Somebody was... One of the odd things about... I don't speak French. And Christopher Hampton, who'd adapted it, is a very, very funny and interesting and serious man who understands French literature. And people would say to me in France, how come it's so French? How come it has this French... the language is as if French. I never knew how he got to that. That's his talent and his genius. I didn't know a thing. So I always make the films, and there's an enormous amount going on that I don't know anything about. I think that's called writing from the or working from the unconscious, which I do more and more. So the answer to your question is Freudian.
Yeah, but how did you start with your very first films?
I found a very good short story, and then I made that. It was a very good short story about the day a revolution broke out in South Africa. And then I went to work with a writer because we were both unemployed, and he turned out to be far more brilliant than, I mean, we just said, oh, like a couple of children, let's write a thriller. He then sat down and started writing a rather autobiographical piece about himself, and it was brilliant. I didn't know he was that clever. And then I took it to Albert Finney, and we made the film.
I have a question. It's more pragmatic, though less intellectual, to Dominic. Are you allowed to talk a little more about the deal you had with Amazon? Or is, as usual, they want to keep very secret about this, but like how many territories did they take? You know, what kind of deal did you have with them?
So Blueprint, we've got a small investment from Sony. So Sony have our distribution rights, but Amazon took the US. It was nice because I got to shop around a bit and go, okay, I've got Stephen Frears, I've got Hugh Grant, I've got Russell T Davies, this is the script, this is the story. Everyone said yes, apart from Netflix. Netflix said they weren't interested. They said it's too niche as a story. Ha, sod you Netflix now. But Amazon we'd heard that they were very easy to deal with.
You were dealing with the US office or with the London office?
Then it was just before they had a UK office, so it was all with the US. Now they've got their UK office, so we had Beth Pattinson there from kind of post onwards, and she's been fantastic. But for the development process, they were over there, they left us alone. They said, so long as the Americans understand the story, we ran casting past them, but it was telling them who we'd cast, not saying, please may we cast. They didn't interfere. I mean, it was interesting as the process went on a bit more, the BBC saying this is our show, and Amazon going, hold on guys, we've given a lot of money as well. There was that little tussle between the two of them. But yeah, Amazon have been amazing, and Amazon's publicity and marketing campaign has been fantastic as well. I mean, it's been very easy. I'm touching.
Are you allowed to say what percentage of the budget they were putting into the production?
It was slightly more than half.
And they would take on the US territory, and for the rest of the world, they were like
rest of the world,
like the other ones?
Just the US territory.
But
so,
were they taking some shares of the other territories?
No.
Only the US.
No,
okay.
only
Thank
US. But they've been so lovely to deal with. They're so lovely to deal with. I think the problem with television going on at the moment is how you get your things seen, though. I mean, it feels like we're throwing our show with Amazon into a big sea of television, and I think that's the problem with television at the moment, is there's so much, and the quality control feels like it's gone down a bit. I mean, I sat watching Netflix the other day with my boyfriend, and we were looking through for half an hour, trying to think, what do you watch? There's too much, and is anything any good? And in the end, we watched Love Island, which is very good instead. Love Island.
It's actually a question I wanted to ask to Stephen, if I may. Stephen, you obviously seen that today there is a huge explosion of series, television everywhere, as you said, Netflix, Amazon, and other. What's your feeling about this kind of explosion of television series all around the world? Or do you have any?
Well, I can see that the Americans stopped making films about America. So there became a sort of market for intelligent work, and that it wasn't in the cinema, because the cinema only makes films about superheroes, or in Britain about the Queen. So you could see there was a vacancy, and the television had moved in to take it over. And I could see that all my friends, Martin Scorsese, everybody, they were now beginning to work in television, because that's where the money is, and you can get things made and so far get them noticed. So
you started with
like most people, I'm entirely opportunist.
You started with television, and then you went into film, and then you came back to television. It seems to me as if you have experienced the golden age of TV drama twice. Is that?
Well, I can see there was one in the 60s and 70s. When was the next one? Or is it now? Now?
Yeah, it's called Now.
Are we in a golden age of drama? I don't know. I just watched the World Cup.
No, yeah, because, and that I think also is so interesting that you don't watch that many series. But, I mean, it's a huge amount of series being produced every year. I think it's 400 in the US.
400 series?
Yeah.
Yeah. 500, Harold says. And
600, 700.
Increased from was it 100 or something to 400 very, very quickly.
What are you asking?
I'm asking, why did you leave television in the first place, and why did you come back?
The only thing that interests me is the material. You know what the truth is, I knew the material that Dominic was asking me to do was more, I mean, I'd be surprised. This is a really immodest thing to say, but I would be surprised if there were many more interesting things being made in England than the Thorpe films. I'd be surprised. So you're being offered something very, very good. I've spent my life gravitating from good thing to good thing. I mean, some of them have failed, of course. So whether it's the cinema or TV is a matter of complete indifference to me. It's because I'm not a snob.
Est-ce qu'il y a encore des questions? Si,
but can you,
please.
yeah, but can you also tell a bit more about, you know, your mistakes that you, I mean, perhaps people can learn of?
That's a terrible question.
Is it? But it's so important, I think, because when we only talk about successes.
There are films I've made that I shouldn't have made.
Yeah. But it's like that. It's not that you have changed your way of working.
Well, I didn't murder my wife, if that's what you... No, it's just you make mistakes and you make them... You agree to do something and then you realize you shouldn't be it's not good enough, or you shouldn't be doing it, or whatever.
Except the films or the series you've done, what is now your favorite series you're watching on whatever platform? Do you have one series you really like and you watch?
I like Belgium very much, and Colombia, and Croatia. Is that what you're asking me?
Not exactly. I'll try again.
I don't watch TV.
Okay, so you don't have any of Netflix, Amazon, and all of these platforms? You have no subscription to that?
I think the lady I live with, she does sneak a look at things on Netflix. Yes, I'm very, very shocked. And I really grew up at a time when, I mean, I've never actually watched a box set in my life. I don't know quite what a box set is. So when I grew up, I think there was one channel, then two. I liked watching. The nice thing about Thorpe was that it was showed every Sunday night, and people would say, "Well, I want to see what happens next." You say, "Well, you have to wait till Sunday night." I liked that very much. I liked the communal experience. So people being able to watch whenever they want. This notion of freedom, I think, is a catastrophe.
Why do you think it is?
Because it was nicer when you all watched at the same time and then you talked about it the next day. I kept saying to the BBC, will there be water cooler moments? Do you know what that... When people all gather around and talk about what was on the TV last night. I like that. But I can see this is a ridiculous, old-fashioned attitude.
I don't know. I think it's changing. I think there's a... If you look at television viewers like a child, they've been given a big family pack of dairy milk, chocolate, and everyone's eating it all at once. And there's actually something quite nice about going, here's a little piece, here's a little piece, here's a little piece, wait. And I think people are starting to come around the other way as well. I think everyone's gorged themselves on television, and you sometimes get to the end of a series and you'll have watched 12 episodes over a weekend, and you don't remember anything about it. You kind of remember a few moments. What was nice about Thorpe, and the BBC talked about playing it all consecutively, releasing it all online, and we said no, we want people to sit on a Sunday night, we want people to watch it at the same time, and we want to create a national conversation, which we have, which is fantastic. But also, we also know people who've said, oh, I've waited till all three are available so I can watch them together. People's viewing, where they've been watching things has changed. But I think people still like the communal experience. They like watching at the same time. They like talking about it the next day.
And they don't like Brexit.
Hate Brexit.
But what about you, Dominic? What kind of stories are you looking for the future?
Everything that we're developing another English scandal at the moment. Although someone last night pitched me a French scandal that sounded very good as well, actually. That was very good. Everything we've got has an intelligence and a heart and an international appeal. So what's been lovely for me leaving the BBC and going to Blueprint is Blueprint, because they made 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, and you have Frances McDormand coming into the office and going, okay, I've read a book. Is this television? Is it film? As a company, we're sharing all our scripts, we share all our talent. So suddenly we've got a project with Daisy Ridley. We've got a few different things where we're merged. I'm giving my television writers to the film people are giving their film talent to me. So everything on my slate, which is quite small at the moment, and it's going to stay small, is quality for an audience. Everything is got to have a quality, but it's got to say something about the world. There's no point making television for television's sake. There's a lot of television shows being made at the moment. Do you think, what's the point of it? What's the point of it? You're just throwing money at the wall in a hole. That's, I think, the danger at the moment. There's a lot of things being made for the sake of it that aren't saying anything about the world. And everything I'm doing at the moment says something about the world or changes the world a bit and makes you laugh and makes you cry at the same time. I think that's important.
And what do you want to say about the word? I mean, you have the perspective of the society.
I think the world is such a messed up place at the moment. It always has been, really. I think it's good to have shows that are about humanity, shows that have a humanity. I think there's a lot of television shows that are quite cold and quite ruthless. And actually, you can be cold and ruthless and have loads of bodies in a freezer, but coming down to humanity underneath it all as well. I think that's what's important, and I think that's what people want at the moment. Is you can tell a story that's crazy or that's depressing, but if it says something about humankind and makes you have a bit more faith in humankind, I think that's important at the moment.
Yeah, great, thank you. Is there our last question? Jean-Marc, no? Oh yeah.
Also behind you.
Bien.
Good morning. My question is more of a general one directed to the both of you about the influences behind your careers, and more specifically, is there one film in particular or one artist whose work you look back to and you think that's where your love affair with fiction started and what made you want to be part of this very specific world that you are in now?
No, there wasn't, but I did meet 2 film directors whom I went to work with as a sort of apprentice, Lindsay Anderson and Carol Rice, and they were wonderful men. And they really turned me into a film director. They are to blame for everything. I mean, I like the same things you like. I'm no, you know. And I did like French cinema. Vigo. And, I saw a film that René Clair made the other day. It was absolutely wonderful. I'd last seen it when I was 12. And I was struck by how similar it was to the work I do. So I was very, very flattered.
Et donc, Jean-Marc? That's it? Ah, okay. A last one? A very last one?
So are we allowed to... did you all see the film last night? Yes. Did you understand the story? Yes. Did he say no? Did someone say no? What didn't he understand? Oh, perhaps they didn't. I can't hear.
Not everybody wants to know the end of the story, of course.
Yeah. Oh, you have to wait for next Sunday night. And so, I mean, I don't... How will
we
they
haven't
see?
sold in France. It's the only place we haven't sold.
Yeah, you know, we do not know the Jeremy Forbes story in France, of course, but it works very well.
It's a story about the establishment about powerful men, I think at a time when world politics is so messed up, and you also have the Me Too movement moving ahead, and you have people... Norman Scott is the person putting their hand up going, this isn't right, what happened to me. And actually you look at that time and he was snowballed into silence and they tried to kill him. And actually at this moment when people are putting their hands up and going, hold on, this isn't right, it's quite nice that Norman's hand has finally been seen. And I think that's the universality of it all. And I think also it's a gay story as well. I mean, Russell's a gay man looking at the story. I'm gay. Stephen loves to flirt with the gays. And he's not even going to tell anyone else on that, Stephen.
Is that what Dan Day-Lewis said?
Yeah, exactly. So actually, it's also, you know, you look at when the first episode starts and homosexuality was illegal, and I think a lot of the younger viewers...
No, I had a thought. It occurred to me that for all foreign sales, and this is as good an audience as anyone, should we write at the beginning that in that in the early 60s it was criminal? Homosexual relations were criminal. In England, there were a lot of discussions about that. Do you need to know that it was actually illegal? When Jeremy Thorpe goes to bed with Norman Scott, it was illegal. And that's presumably why he was always so scared that it was going to come out. It wasn't just filth, it was a crime. And that was what he was nervous of it coming out. And I wondered this morning, I wonder if we should put at the start of French versions, or indeed American versions, that it was criminal. When did they legalize homosexual relations in France?
1981.
1981?
1981?
No.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Well, do you mean that Angers Gide was a criminal?
But you can see in the first scene the way they talk to each other that there is something, they have to hide something.
Yeah.
So
and Stephen moved that scene. That scene was later in the script. You moved that to the first scene, didn't you?
So the information is there for us. Yeah.
1981.
1981?
Yeah, but I think in a lot of
God, you're a bunch of
countries...
savages.
But in a lot of the European countries it was criminal, but it wasn't, and I think in Norway it was in 69, 71, something like that. But I didn't think it was practice. I didn't think, you know, people were put in jail because of homosexuality.
Oh, in England, John Gielgud was put in jail. The finest in the land were put in jail. And also because of the public school system, it was at its most rife in the public school system that produced, you know, many, many prime ministers and Jeremy Thorpe. So it was endlessly complicated and hypocritical.
Yeah, because Jeremy Thorpe, he came out of Eton as well, did he? Yeah, and
Yep.
then the boys were having fun because there were no girls. Yeah.
There were no girls at public schools, yes. It was a shock to me when I discovered girls. Somewhere in my 30s.
So did you also go to, no, did you go to, not public school, I mean private school?
Well, it is this peculiar thing that the private schools are called public schools in Britain, and for some reason that I don't understand. Anyway, yes, I went to public school and escaped alive. And I worked on a film called If, about a public school made 50 years ago, and somebody asked a question about homosexuality. Well, it was never, I mean, I said, I have no memory of a discussion about homosexuality. It was just part of public school culture. It was just absolutely what people did.
One more question.
Trying to understand you more, you said you don't watch television, so I couldn't know what series you like now. But can you tell us 1, 2, or 3 films you really love, and that the film you are watching and made who you are as a director?
No, because I like what you like. So I like The Godfather, but that's not very informative saying that. It's everybody likes The Godfather. Everybody likes La Règle du Jeu.
Everybody has 2 or 3 favorite movies, and you probably have
No, but
them too.
if I tell you them, I'll change my mind in 2 minutes, so I'll go mad.
Okay, thank you.
I like The Third Man very much.
Yesterday, yeah, you talked about Renoir movie yesterday.
Is that right? Did I?
Yeah. Noir.
Change your mind already?
No, I would say I have very, very good taste.
Must have.
And what about the next project? Are you working on something?
The next surprise.
We're working on something.
He is working on something.
We're both we're working on things separately, but not quite. I'm throwing scripts at Stephen.
I'm very, very hot, but I'm unemployed.
And what about you, Dominic? Next project?
We have a writer adapting. Graham Norton's written a novel set in West Cork in Ireland. It's a detective series. We work on that. We've got something with Daisy Ridley. We've also bought the rights to a show called Fauda. I don't know if people have seen that. So we've bought the rights to that, and we're going to reset that in Northern Ireland in the Troubles, in 70s, 80s Northern Ireland. Because again, it's this amazing story that's about neighbours fighting over a fence, and it's about families and seeing both sides of a conflict in a very human way. So we've got an amazing writer, who I can't mention his name yet because he's not signed his deal, but an amazing writer adapting that for us. So we've got some really nice things, and hopefully Frances McDormand doing something as well, if I can woo her properly.
Oh, yes. Thank you. And
But last night, the woman who spoke here, the big shop, she told the story of Pompidou, Mrs. Pompidou, and
Valérie,
Scandal.
le président. Oui.
I said, why has that never been filmed? And she then told, it was a wonderful story, Alain Delon, everything, it was fantastic. So there's a tip, make that film. Very, very good story. Sex, corruption.
Everything you need.
Absolutely. Everything that makes life worth living.
So thank you everyone for being here this morning with us. Thank you, Mr. Frears. Thank you, Dominic.